The room at the Grand Elysium Hall went dead silent. Davis Thorne, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries, held a glass of 1982 Petrus in one hand and a check for $100,000 in the other. He looked at Alice, a trembling waitress, and gave her a choice that was designed to destroy her dignity in front of Chicago's elite. "Everyone has a price," he sneered, looking around at his laughing guests. "Prove me right, and the money is yours." But Alice didn't take the check. She didn't cry. She looked the billionaire in the eye and delivered an answer so cutting, so legally precise, that by the time she finished, Davis Thorne wasn't just embarrassed. He was terrified. This is the story of the dinner that changed everything. The air inside the Grand Elysium ballroom didn't smell like food. It smelled of old money, heavy perfume, and the kind of desperate ambition that could only be found at a charity gala hosted by Davis Thorne. For Alice Vance, the smell was suffocating. She adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform, ensuring her name tag was perfectly straight. "Alice," it read, just a first name. To the people in this room, titans of industry, heirs to oil fortunes and tech moguls, she didn't need a last name. She didn't have a history. She was just a pair of hands holding a tray of champagne, a ghost moving between the gilded tables. "Check your stations," the floor manager, a nervous man named Arthur Pendleton, hissed into his earpiece. "Mr. Thorne has arrived. If a single glass is empty for more than 10 seconds, you're fired. Do I make myself clear?" Alice tapped her earpiece once to acknowledge. She didn't need the threat. She needed this job more than oxygen. Her brother Toby was sitting in a hospital bed 3 miles away, waiting for a specialist to approve a spinal surgery that insurance had laughed at. Every shift at the Elysium was another drop in the bucket of a debt that felt like an ocean. The double doors swung open. The room, previously buzzing with the low hum of gossip, fell into a reverent hush. Davis Thorne walked in. He was taller than he looked in the magazines. At 42, he possessed a predatory grace, wearing a bespoke tuxedo that probably cost more than Alice's childhood home. On his arm was clear socialite bait, a model named Seraphina Sterling, who looked bored and beautiful in equal measure. But it was Davis's eyes that caught Alice's attention as she stood by the service entrance. They were cold, scanning the room not with warmth, but with the calculation of an auditor looking for a discrepancy. He was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a venture capital firm known for hostile takeovers. He didn't build things, he bought things, stripped them for parts, and sold the scraps. He was a man who believed value was a number, never a feeling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Davis's voice boomed without a microphone, commanding the space instantly. "Tonight isn't just about charity, it's about potential. It's about separating the wheat from the chaff." Applause rippled through the room. Alice kept her head down, moving into the crowd with her tray. "Keep moving. Don't make eye contact." "You are furniture," she told herself. It was a mantra she had perfected over the last 6 months. Before the accident that took her parents and crippled her finances, Alice hadn't been invisible. She had been top of her class at Columbia Law, a shark in training. She knew torts and contracts better than she knew how to balance 4 plates on one arm. But life had a way of humbling you. And now, the only bar she was passing was the one serving gin and tonics. She navigated toward table 4, where a group of investment bankers were laughing loudly. "So I told him." One man with a red face was shouting, "If you can't handle the pressure, go drive a truck." And he cried, actually cried. The table erupted in laughter. Alice silently slid a fresh glass of scotch onto the coaster, her wrist turning elegantly to avoid bumping the man's elbow. "Whoa! Watch it, sweetheart," the man snapped, though she hadn't touched him. He looked up, his eyes glassy. You almost spilled a $50 scotch on a $5,000 suit." "I apologize, sir," Alice said, her voice smooth and practiced. "It won't happen again." "See that?" The man gestured to his friends. "That's the difference. Some people are born to wear the suits, and some are born to clean them." Alice's jaw tightened, but her expression remained neutral. She had heard worse. She turned to leave, but her path was blocked. Davis Thorne was standing there. He hadn't been there a second ago. He moved with a frightening silence. He wasn't looking at the banker. He was looking at Alice. He had heard the comment. "Is there a problem here, Marcus?" Davis asked, his voice silky but carrying a dangerous undercurrent. Marcus, the banker, scrambled to stand up, buttoning his jacket. "Mr. Thorne." No problem. Just educating the help." Davis's eyes didn't leave Alice's face. He was studying her, analyzing the way she held her posture, the intelligence behind her eyes that she failed to hide. He saw something there that irritated him. Resistance. Davis hated resistance. "Educating the help," Davis repeated, swirling his wine. "Interesting concept. You think she needs education?" "Well, clearly," Marcus laughed nervously. "Otherwise, she wouldn't be serving drinks, right?" Davis smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "I've always theorized that the only difference between the people at these tables and the people serving them is circumstance. And a price tag. Everyone has a price, Marcus. Even the help." Alice felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She recognized that look. It was the look of a cat toying with a mouse before the snap of the neck. She tried to step back. "I should return to the kitchen, Mr. Thorne. The main course is coming out." "Stay," Davis commanded. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in it froze her feet to the marble floor. He raised a hand, signaling the orchestra to stop. The music died out. The chatter in the room faded as everyone turned toward the center of the room, where the billionaire stood facing the waitress. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" Davis announced. The spotlight operator, sensing the moment, swung the beam onto them. Alice was blinded for a second, blinking in the harsh light. "We talk a lot about economics in this room," Davis addressed the crowd, pacing around Alice like she was a statue on display. "We talk about market value. But what is the market value of dignity? Marcus here thinks this young woman is beneath him. I want to test that theory." Alice's heart hammered against her ribs. "Please, not this. I just need this paycheck. I just need to pay the hospital." "What is your name?" Davis asked, stepping close to her. "Alice, sir." "Alice." He rolled the name around his mouth. "A pretty name. Tell me, Alice, do you like your job?" "It pays the bills, sir." "Honest," Davis chuckled. "I like honesty. But I bet you'd like to pay those bills faster. I bet you have debts. Everyone looks at a waitress and assumes there is a sad story. Sick parent, deadbeat husband, student loans." He was guessing, but he was striking nerves with surgical precision. "We are conducting a social experiment tonight," Davis announced, reaching into his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a checkbook. The sound of a pen scratching against paper was audible in the silent room. He ripped the check out and held it up. $10,000, Davis said, loud enough for the back tables to hear. "Alice, this check is yours. All you have to do is pour that tray of drinks you are holding onto Marcus." The room gasped. Marcus turned pale. "Davis, come on, that's—" "Quiet, Marcus," Davis snapped. He looked at Alice. 10,000! Instant cash! Marcus insulted you. He treated you like dirt. Don't you want revenge? Don't you want the money? Just dump the tray on his head." Alice looked at the check. $10,000. That was 3 months of rent and medication. It was tempting, but she looked at Marcus. A jerk, yes, but a human being. "No, sir," Alice said quietly. "It would be unprofessional. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Davis's smile widened. He wasn't disappointed. He was delighted. Principles, I love it. The price was too low. He wrote another check. $50,000, Davis said, his voice dropping an octave. But the terms have changed. I don't want you to pour it on Marcus. I want you to get on your knees and clean Marcus's shoes with your apron. Right now. The silence in the Grand Elysium was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. $50,000. Alice stared at the piece of paper fluttering in Davis's hand. The world narrowed down to that check. $50,000 would pay for Toby's surgery immediately. It would stop the collection calls. It would buy her freedom from the crushing weight that sat on her chest every morning she woke up. All she had to do was kneel. All she had to do was lower herself, physically and spiritually, in front of 300 of the city's wealthiest people. She looked at Marcus's shoes. They were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. Come now, Davis goaded, sensing her hesitation. He turned to the crowd. Look at her face. She's considering it, you see? Dignity is just a commodity. It fluctuates like the stock market. When the offer is high enough, the pride vanishes. Alice started, her voice dry. 50,000, Davis repeated. Think of what that buys. A new car, a down payment on a house, or maybe just the satisfaction of knowing you survived. Alice's hands shook, the glasses on her tray clinking softly. She thought of the law degree she abandoned. She thought of the nights she studied constitutional law, reading about rights, about human worth. Inalienable rights. She slowly lowered the tray to a nearby empty table. The crowd leaned in. Some were filming with their phones. This was sport to them, a gladiator match where the lions were poverty and the weapon was humiliation. Alice took a step toward Marcus. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Davis, this is excessive, he muttered. It's distinctively educational, Davis countered. Kneel, Alice. Alice looked at Davis. For the first time, she really looked at him. Not as a billionaire, but as a man. She saw the hollowness in him. He needed this. He needed to break her to prove that he wasn't broken himself, to prove that everyone was as corruptible as he was. If she knelt, she saved her brother. But she lost herself. If she didn't kneel, she kept her pride, but walked away with nothing. But Alice Vance knew something Davis didn't. She knew the law, and she knew exactly who Davis Thorne was, beyond the headlines. She had spent her nights not just worrying, but reading. She followed the markets. She followed the legal filings. She realized suddenly that this wasn't a test of her dignity. It was a test of his arrogance. Alice stood straight. She smoothed her apron. She didn't kneel. "Is the offer valid, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice projecting clearer than before. "Cash on delivery," Davis smirked. "But you have to kneel. And if I refuse the task, but offer you something of equal value?" Alice asked. Davis laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Equal value? You're a waitress. What could you possibly have that is worth $50,000 to me? The recipe for the crab cakes?" The crowd chuckled sycophantically. "Information," Alice said. The laughter died down. Davis cocked his head. "Excuse me?" "I won't clean his shoes," Alice said, stepping away from Marcus and turning fully toward Davis. "But I will answer a question. You said you wanted to test my worth. You think my worth is defined by my obedience. I think my worth is defined by my competence." "You're boring me." Davis checked his watch. "The offer is expiring in 10 seconds. "The merger with Vespertech," Alice said. Davis froze. His hand holding the check stopped in midair. The smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. Vespertech was a rumored acquisition, highly confidential. If news leaked that Thorne Dynamics was buying them, the stock price would skyrocket before Davis could close the deal. It was $1 billion secret. "What did you say?" Davis whispered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You're acquiring Vespertech," Alice said, her voice steady. "But you aren't doing it through the regulatory channels. You're using a shell company in the Caymans called Obsidian Holdings to bypass the antitrust laws. And you're doing it because Vespertech's patent on the new semiconductor is invalid, but you need to buy them before the patent office realizes it, so you can bury the evidence and claim the tech as your own." The silence now wasn't just quiet. It was the silence of a bomb about to go off. Guests were looking at each other. Lawyers in the room were suddenly very alert. "Who are you?" Davis hissed, stepping closer, his menace no longer playful. It was real. "I'm just the help," Alice said, throwing his words back at him. "But you test people, Mr. Thorne. You look for value. Well, here is the test. That information is worth a lot more than $50,000. If I say it loudly enough for the journalists in the back to hear the details of the Cayman accounts—" She let the sentence hang. Davis looked at the guests. He looked at the journalists near the bar, who were now pointing their phones directly at him. He looked at his lawyer, Silas Vane, who was standing by the emergency exit, frantically making a cut-it gesture across his throat. Davis realized he had walked into a trap of his own making. He had handed a microphone to the one person he thought had no voice. "You're bluffing," Davis said, though sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. "You're a waitress. You overheard something and you're spinning a fairy tale." "Test me," Alice challenged. She took a step forward, invading his personal space. "Ask me the registration number of Obsidian Holdings. Ask me the date the patent expires." She paused, locking eyes with him. "Or," she said, raising her voice slightly, "you can write a new check." "A new check," Davis choked out. "Yes. Not for me to kneel," Alice said, "but a donation to the Children's Spinal Research Ward at Mercy Hospital, in my name." "How much?" Davis asked through gritted teeth. Alice smiled. It was the first time she smiled that night. $100,000, double or nothing." The room was paralyzed. The billionaire was being held hostage in plain sight by a woman in a polyester uniform. "And if I don't?" Davis threatened. "Then I finished the story about the patent fraud," Alice replied calmly. "And I think the SEC is having a dinner down the street tonight. I could probably catch them before dessert." Davis Thorne stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the intellect. He realized, too late, that he hadn't cornered a mouse. He had stepped on a viper. He looked at the crowd. They were waiting. If he backed down, he looked weak. If he let her speak, he went to prison. He pulled out his pen. His hand was shaking with rage. "To whom?" he snarled. "Mercy Hospital," Alice said. "And make it out for consulting fees." The sound of the check being torn from the book was the loudest noise in the room. It was a jagged, violent sound, like a bone snapping. Davis Thorne held the slip of paper between two manicured fingers, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. He didn't hand it to Alice. He let it drop. The check fluttered through the air, drifting slowly before landing on the polished marble floor between them. It was a final insult. Even in defeat, he wanted her to bend. He wanted her to pick it up off the ground, like a scrap of food thrown to a dog. Alice looked at the check. $100,000. It was right there. She looked up at Davis. His eyes were voids, stripping her of humanity, promising retribution. "Take it," he whispered, his voice only audible to her. "But know this, Alice. Money moves fast. But I move faster. You might walk out of here with that paper, but you will never spend a dime of it." Alice squatted down. She didn't kneel. There was a difference. She crouched with dignity, picked up the paper, and checked the signature. It was valid. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to crash. "You've just saved a life. I hope that buys you some sleep tonight." She turned and walked away. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. No one spoke. No one mocked her. They looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. She was a walking anomaly, a woman who had slapped a titan and survived. As she pushed through the double doors into the kitchen, the spell broke. The kitchen was chaos, but it fell silent the moment she entered. Arthur, the floor manager, was shaking. He looked at Alice as if she were holding a live grenade. "You," Arthur stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "You are out. You are done. Get your things. Go." "I'm going, Arthur," Alice said, untying her apron. She felt lightheaded. "You didn't just lose your job, Alice," Arthur hissed, stepping close to her, his eyes darting toward the ballroom doors to ensure Davis wasn't following. "You just blacklisted yourself in this city. Do you know who he is? He will burn this hotel down just to get to you. Get out the back. Run." Alice didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her purse from her locker, clutching the check against her chest like a shield. She ran out the service exit into the cool Chicago night. The alleyway smelled of rain and garbage, a stark contrast to the perfumes inside. She fumbled for her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it twice. She dialed the number for Mercy Hospital. "Billing department," a tired voice answered. "This is Alice Vance," she gasped, walking briskly toward the subway station, looking over her shoulder at every shadow. "I have the funds. For Toby. I have the full amount. I'm coming now. Don't cancel the surgery. Please don't cancel it. Miss Vance, the surgery is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow, but without payment. Clearing I have a check," Alice said, her voice rising. "A certified check from Davis Thorne." There was a pause on the line. "The Billionaire?" "Yes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Alice hung up. She reached the subway platform. It was empty, save for a man reading a newspaper on a bench further down. She leaned against the tiled wall, closing her eyes. She had done it. She had actually done it. But back at the Grand Elysium, the war was just beginning. Davis Thorne stood in the center of the ballroom, the guests awkwardly trying to restart their conversations. He signaled to Silas Vane, his corporate counsel and personal fixer. Silas was a man who looked like he was carved out of grey stone. He approached Davis smoothly. "Damage control is already underway," Silas said efficiently. "I've confiscated the phones of the staff near the front. We're scrubbing the social media feeds of the guests. The video won't go viral." "I don't care about the video," Davis said, taking a sip of fresh wine to wash the taste of defeat out of his mouth. "I care about the leak. How did she know about Obsidian Holdings? That file is encrypted on a server that doesn't exist on paper." "She's a waitress, Davis. Someone must have been talking." "No," Davis shook his head. "She wasn't just repeating gossip. She knew the legal implications. She knew the patent dates. She has a background. Find out who she is. Find out where she lives. And Silas?" "Yes, sir." "Call the bank. That check? Flag it." Davis smiled, a cruel, razor-thin expression. "Report it as stolen. If she tries to cash it, I want the alarms to ring so loud they wake the dead." The automatic doors of Mercy Hospital slid open with a hiss. The fluorescent lights were harsh, stinging Alice's tired eyes. It was 11:30 p.m. She ran to the billing desk. The night administrator, a kind woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had watched Alice cry over bills for months, looked up. "Alice, you look like you've seen a ghost." "I got it." Alice slammed the check onto the counter. It was wrinkled from her grip. "It's all there, 100,000. Mrs. Higgins picked up the check. Her eyes widened. "Thorn Dynamics? Alice, how in heaven's name?" "Don't ask," Alice pleaded. "Just process it. Please. Toby needs that surgery in 6 hours." Mrs. Higgins nodded, sensing the desperation. She typed rapidly into her computer. "Okay, I'm putting it through the urgent deposit system. It usually takes a few minutes to verify with a sum this large, but since it's a verified corporate account, it should clear instantly." Alice slumped into a plastic chair. She thought of Toby. He was only 14. He had been in that bed for 8 months since the car accident that killed their parents. He was the only thing she had left. If this surgery worked, he would walk again. If it didn't happen, the paralysis would be permanent. "Alice!" Mrs. Higgins's voice had changed. It wasn't warm anymore. It was confused. Alice looked up. "What?" "What is it?" "The system." Mrs. Higgins frowned, tapping her screen. "It's rejecting the check." Alice's stomach dropped. She rushed to the counter. "That's impossible. He wrote it in front of me. He has the money." "It's not insufficient funds," Mrs. Higgins said slowly. "It's a code 99. The check has been reported stolen." The room spun. "Stolen?" Alice whispered. No, he gave it to me. There were witnesses." "Alice, the system automatically alerts the police on a code 99. It's protocol for checks over $10,000. Before Alice could process the betrayal, the reality of Davis's threat crashed down on her. Money moves fast, but I move faster. He hadn't just cancelled the payment, he had framed her. He wanted her arrested. If she was in jail, she couldn't talk about Obsidian Holdings. "Mrs. Higgins, you have to believe me," Alice begged, tears pricking her eyes. "I didn't steal it. He's trying to trap me." I want to believe you, honey," the older woman said, looking fearful. "But the screen is locked. I can't override it." 2 uniformed police officers walked into the lobby. They didn't look like they were in a rush, but they headed straight for the billing desk. They had been dispatched the moment the digital flag was tripped. "Alice Vance?" the taller officer asked, his hand resting near his belt. Alice backed away. "I didn't do it. You have to listen to me." "Ma'am, we have a report of grand larceny and forgery regarding a check from Mr. Davis Thorne," the officer said monotonically. "We need you to come with us." "My brother is in surgery prep," Alice screamed, panic taking over. "If I leave, they cancel the operation." "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The officer pulled out cuffs. It was over. The trap had snapped shut. Alice felt the cold metal against her wrists. She looked toward the hallway leading to Toby's room. She had failed. She had played a game against the devil, and she had forgotten that the devil owns the board. "Wait." The voice came from the hospital entrance. It was deep, authoritative, and calm. The officers turned. Alice twisted her head. Walking toward them was a man Alice recognized from the party. He hadn't been at the loud tables. He had been standing in the shadows, near the back, drinking water. He was older than Davis, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and a heavy wool coat. He walked with a limp, using a cane with a silver handle. "Who are you?" the officer asked. "My name is Damon Cross," the man said. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to the cop. "I am a senior partner at Cross & Sterling. I represent Ms. Vance." Alice stared at him. She had never met this man in her life. "You represent her?" The officer looked at the card, his demeanor instantly changing. Cross & Sterling was the most powerful defense firm in Chicago. They defended senators and mob bosses. I do, Damon lied smoothly. And I was present at the Grand Elysium tonight. I witnessed Mr. Thorne write that check and hand it to my client as payment for a wager. It was a verbal contract, witnessed by 300 people. Filing a stolen check report is a felony. Filing a false police report. Are you sure you want to arrest the victim here? The officers hesitated. They looked at each other. Arresting a waitress was easy. Going up against Damon Cross was career suicide. The bank flagged it, Mr. Cross, the officer said defensively. The bank made an error based on a malicious call, Damon said, stepping between the police and Alice. Uncuff her. I will take personal responsibility for her appearance at the precinct tomorrow morning to sort this out. But right now, she has a family medical emergency. The tension in the air was thick. The officer looked at the weeping Alice, then at the formidable lawyer. Fine, the officer grunted, unlocking the cuffs. But don't leave town. We'll be in touch. The police turned and left. Alice rubbed her wrists, staring at the stranger. Who are you? Why did you help me? Damon Cross looked at her, his expression unreadable. I didn't do it for you, Miss Vance. I did it because I've been waiting 10 years for someone to make Davis Thorne bleed. And tonight, you drew first blood. He gestured to the billing desk. I will cover the surgery cost. My personal card. Alice gasped. I can't repay you. You don't need to repay me with money, Damon said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. You said something about Obsidian Holdings. You know about the fraud. Yes, Alice whispered. Good, Damon smiled. And it was a wolfish smile, but one that was on her side. Get your brother his surgery. Tomorrow, you and I are going to war. Davis thinks he silenced you. He has no idea he just handed me the weapon I need to destroy him. Alice looked at the check on the counter, then at Damon. She realized she had stepped out of the frying pan and into the fire. But at least in this fire, she had a flamethrower of her own. Deal, Alice said. The waiting room coffee tasted like burnt plastic, but to Alice it was nectar. It was 8:00 a.m. The surgeon had just come out. Toby was stable. The decompression worked. He would need months of rehab, but he would walk. Alice slumped against the vinyl chair, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. She hadn't slept in 24 hours. Don't get too comfortable, a voice rumbled. Damon Cross was standing there, looking as fresh as if he'd just stepped out of a spa, despite having spent the night pacing the hospital corridor with her. He held a thick manila folder. We have work to do, Damon said. My driver is outside. We're going to my office. Can I just see him first? Alice asked. He's sedated. He won't know you're there. But Davis Thorne is very much awake, and by now he knows I paid the bill. He's going to come for you, Alice. Not with police this time, with lawyers. We need to strike before he files a cease and desist. Alice nodded, splashing cold water on her face in the restroom before following Damon to a sleek black town car. Damon's office was a fortress of glass and steel in the loop, appropriately named the Citadel by his competitors. His office was on the 45th floor, overlooking the city like a watchtower. Coffee. Black, Damon ordered his assistant as they walked in. He tossed the file onto his mahogany desk. Sit. Alice sat. She felt small in the leather chair, still wearing her street clothes from the night before. I ran a background check on you, Damon said bluntly. Alice Vance, Columbia Law, top 5% of your class, editor of the Law Review. You dropped out 6 months before graduation. My parents died, Alice said, her voice hollow. The debt was inherited. The life insurance didn't pay out because of a technicality, a pre-existing condition clause regarding my father's heart. I had to work. Law school doesn't pay the mortgage." "A technicality," Damon mused. "You hate them." "I hate people who use them to crush others," Alice corrected. "Good. Hold on to that anger. You're going to need it." Damon opened the file. "I had my forensic accountants dig into Obsidian Holdings last night while you were worrying about your brother. We found the Cayman registration papers." "And?" Alice asked, leaning forward. The waitress was gone. The law student was back. "Davis is smart," Damon admitted. "He never puts his name on anything illegal. Obsidian Holdings, the shell company he's using to buy Vespertech, isn't registered to Davis Thorne. It's registered to a proxy, a straw man, someone with no assets, no profile, and no way to fight back if the SEC comes knocking." "Who is it?" Alice asked. "Marcus? One of his executives?" Damon slid a paper across the desk. It was a photocopy of a registration document from the Cayman Islands. "Look at the director's signature." Alice looked. Her breath hitched in her throat. The world tilted on its axis. The signature was shaky, but legible. Alice Vance. "What?" Alice gasped, dropping the paper. "I never signed this. I've never been to the Caymans." "Look at the date," Damon pointed. 2 years ago. Were you working for a catering company then?" "Yes," Alice whispered. "Elite Staffing Solutions. We did a Christmas party at Thorne's private residence." "He harvested your data," Damon said, his voice cold and hard. "He probably had everyone fill out detailed tax forms or NDAs, took your social security numbers, and copies of your signatures. He used your identity to create the shell company. To the world, you are the CEO of Obsidian Holdings. You are the one breaking antitrust laws. If the deal goes south, you go to federal prison for 20 years. He walks away clean." Alice felt sick. The cruelty of it was staggering. He hadn't just humiliated her last night. He had been using her as a human shield for 2 years. She wasn't just a waitress to him. She was disposable liability insurance. "He stole my name," Alice said, her voice trembling with rage. "He did," Damon nodded. "Identity theft, fraud, racketeering, but proving it is hard. He has a team of lawyers who will say you signed it willingly for a payout." Alice stood up. She walked to the window, looking out at the skyline where Davis Thorne was somewhere sitting in a penthouse, thinking he was untouchable. "He made a mistake," Alice said softly. "What mistake?" Alice turned around. A dark, terrifying smile played on her lips, the same smile she had worn when she refused to kneel. "He made me the CEO," Alice said. "Legally on paper, I own Obsidian Holdings. I own the shell company." Damon's eyes widened as he realized where she was going. "Alice, I don't need to prove fraud to stop him," Alice said, pacing the room, her mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "If I am the director, then I control the assets. I control the acquisition." "You want to hijack the merger," Damon said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "He wants to buy Vespertech today, right?" Alice checked the wall clock. "The closing meeting is at noon at Thorne Tower. He's expecting the transfer of ownership from Obsidian to Thorne Dynamics." "He is," Damon confirmed. "Well," Alice smoothed her shirt, "I think the CEO of Obsidian Holdings should attend that meeting. I think we need to renegotiate the terms." Damon Cross laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh. He stood up and pressed a button on his intercom. "Sarah, cancel my appointments. And get a stylist in here. We need a power suit. Size 4. He looked at Alice. "We're going to a board meeting." Thorne Tower was a monument to ego, 60 floors of black glass piercing the Chicago sky. The conference room on the top floor was lined with executives, lawyers, and the nervous representatives from Vespertech. Davis Thorne sat at the head of the table. He was in a good mood. The Waitress incident was being scrubbed from the internet. The police report for the check was filed. He had won. Today, he would acquire Vesper Tech for pennies on the dollar, masking the monopoly through Obsidian Holdings, and his stock would double by Monday. We are just waiting for the final digital signature from the Obsidian representative, the Vesper Tech CEO said, looking at his tablet. It's unusual that they aren't here in person. Obsidian prefers to remain a silent partner, Davis said smoothly. Silent and efficient. My legal team handles their correspondence. Actually, a voice rang out from the heavy oak doors. Obsidian has decided to get loud. The doors swung open. Davis dropped his pen. Alice Vance walked in. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue tailored suit that cost more than her car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She didn't look like the help. She looked like a shark. Behind her, leaning on his cane with a predatory smirk, was Damon Cross. "Security!" Davis roared, standing up. "Get this woman out of here. She is a thief and a trespasser." Two guards moved forward, but Damon Cross held up a hand. "Touch her, and I'll have you charged with assault on a corporate officer. Check your bylaws." "What is this nonsense?" the Vespertech CEO asked, confused. "I am Alice Vance," she announced, walking straight to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Davis. She pulled it out and sat down. "I am the sole director and majority shareholder of Obsidian Holdings, the entity that is currently purchasing your company." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "You're lying," Davis hissed, his face turning a shade of purple. "She's a waitress. She served you drinks last night." "I was undercover," Alice lied effortlessly, "checking on my investment." She pulled a folder from her bag, the Cayman documents. She slid them down the table to the Vespertech lawyers. "As you can see, the registration is in my name. The accounts are in my name. Legally, I am Obsidian." The lawyers scrambled to read the documents. They whispered frantically. "Mr. Thorne," the lead attorney for Vespertech said, looking pale. "These documents are authentic. She is the signatory." Davis was trapped. If he admitted she was a waitress and he forged her signature, he was admitting to federal fraud in front of witnesses. If he maintained the lie that Obsidian was a legitimate partner, he had to treat her as the CEO. He had built a cage of lies, and Alice had just locked him inside it. "What do you want?" Davis asked through gritted teeth, sitting slowly back down. "We have some concerns about the acquisition terms," Alice said, opening her own file. "Specifically, the transfer of Vespertech's patents to Thorne Dynamics. I don't think it's in Obsidian's best interest to sell the technology to you, Davis." "You work for me," Davis shouted, losing his composure. "It's my money in those accounts." "Is it?" Alice raised an eyebrow. "Because according to the bank records, the money belongs to Obsidian Holdings. And since I am the only authorized signatory, it's my money." She turned to the Vespertech CEO. "Gentlemen, Obsidian Holdings is withdrawing its offer to sell the patents to Thorne Dynamics. Instead, we are considering an open-source release of the technology." "You can't do that," Davis slammed his fist on the table. "That patent is worth billions." "Then buy it from me," Alice said coolly. "Legally. I already paid for it." "You paid a shell company," Alice corrected. "A shell company I run. Now, if you want the rights, you'll have to negotiate with me directly, and my price has gone up." Davis looked at Damon Cross. Damon just winked. "This is blackmail," Davis whispered. "No," Alice said, leaning in, her eyes locking with his. "This is business. Everyone has a price, right, Davis? You taught me that." She stood up. "The current deal is dead. If you want the tech, you will transfer $50 million to an escrow account by 5 p.m. today. If not, I dissolve Obsidian Holdings tomorrow morning, and the SEC gets a full audit of every transaction the company has ever made, including the ones you tried to hide." She looked around the room. "Gentlemen, I think we're done here." Alice turned and walked out. As the door closed, the room erupted into chaos. Davis Thorne sank into his chair, staring at the mahogany surface. He had created a ghost to hide his sins, and the ghost had just walked in and taken his empire. In the hallway, Alice walked toward the elevator. Her legs felt like jelly. She leaned against the wall as the doors closed, leaving her alone with Damon. "You were terrifying," Damon said, admiringly. "I think I'm in love." Alice let out a shaky breath. "Did we win?" "We wounded him," Damon said. "But a wounded animal is dangerous. He won't pay the $50 million. He can't. It would admit guilt." "So what does he do?" "He tries to kill the messenger," Damon said grimly. "We need to go to the federal prosecutor. Now. You need protection." The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the lobby. But the lobby wasn't empty. Police were waiting. Not the beat cops from last night. These were men in suits. FBI. "Alice Vance?" the lead agent asked, flashing a badge. "Yes?" "We have a warrant for your arrest," the agent said. "On what charges?" Damon stepped forward, his voice booming. "The check was resolved." "Not for the check," the agent said, looking at Alice with a strange mix of pity and severity. "For corporate espionage, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of $70 million from Thorne Dynamics via a Cayman shell company called Obsidian Holdings." Alice froze. Davis had anticipated this. He had flipped the narrative. He was claiming she was the mastermind. He was claiming she had stolen his money to set up the company herself. He was framing her for the very crime she was trying to expose. He reported himself to frame me, Alice realized, horror washing over her. "Cuff her," the agent ordered. The interrogation room at the FBI Chicago field office was a box of gray concrete and stale air. Alice sat handcuffed to the table. Across from her sat Special Agent Miller, a man with tired eyes who had seen too many white-collar criminals try to talk their way out of prison. "It's a simple story, Ms. Vance," Miller said, sliding a photo across the table. It was a picture of her entering Thorne Tower earlier that day. "You worked for Mr. Thorne's catering company years ago. You stole banking routing numbers. You created a shell company, Obsidian Holdings, and siphoned off $70 million over 2 years to play CEO. And when the walls started closing in, you tried to blackmail Mr. Thorne into buying his own technology back from you." Alice stared at the photo. It looked bad. It looked exactly like the narrative Davis had constructed. "I didn't steal anything," Alice said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I was framed. The company was created using my identity without my consent. Mr. Thorne has provided us with logs," Miller said. "Emails from Alice Vance, authorizing the transfers. Digital signatures. Fabricated." Damon Cross's voice boomed as the heavy steel door swung open. Damon walked in, not looking like a lawyer, but like a gladiator entering the arena. He carried a laptop and a small flash drive. "Agent Miller," Damon nodded. "You're interrogating my client based on evidence provided by the victim. Standard procedure. But did you verify the origin of the theft?" "We are tracing the IPs now," Miller said defensively. "But Mr. Thorne's team was very helpful." "I bet they were," Damon scoffed. He slammed his laptop onto the table and opened it. "I'm not here to argue bail, Miller. I'm here to save you the embarrassment of arresting the wrong person while the real criminal flees the country on a G650 jet." Miller frowned. "What do you have?" "Davis Thorne is arrogant," Alice spoke up, realizing Damon's plan. He thinks people like me don't leave footprints, but he forgets that people like him leave craters. Damon plugged in the flash drive. Alice and I anticipated he would try to frame her. In fact, we counted on it. See, by reporting the embezzlement, Davis had to admit that Obsidian Holdings exists and that the money moved from Thorn Dynamics to Obsidian. He admitted the crime happened. He just lied about who pushed the button. Damon turned the screen toward the agent. This, Damon pointed, is the metadata from the creation of Obsidian Holdings, dated 2 years ago. Davis's team scrubbed the server, but they forgot the Cayman Registry's backup logs. The company was incorporated at 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. So? Miller asked. At 3:14 a.m. on that Tuesday, Alice said, her memory sharp. I was working a double shift at a diner in Queens. Here is my time card. She slid a piece of paper Damon had retrieved. Clocked out at 4:11 a.m. Physically impossible for me to be on a secure server in the Cayman Islands. And here is the kicker. Damon grinned. We traced the IP address that did create the company. It wasn't a public server. It was a static IP. Specifically the residential IP for the penthouse at the Grand Elysium. Davis Thorne's private residence. Agent Miller leaned in, his eyes scanning the data. He stole her identity, Damon pressed. He set up the company from his living room. He transferred his own money into it to hide it from the tax man and the antitrust regulators. And today, when Alice exposed him, he panicked and tried to pin the tail on the waitress. Miller stood up slowly. He looked at Alice, then at the data. The narrative had flipped. The victim was the perpetrator. If this data holds up, Miller said quietly, Thorne just filed a false federal report to cover up massive securities fraud. He's at the airport, Miller. Damon checked his watch. His flight plan to Zurich was filed 20 minutes ago. He's running. Miller grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Miller. Put a hold on tail number N65JT at O'Hare. Ground it. Repeat. Ground it. I want units on the tarmac. Now. The engines of the private jet were whining, the high-pitched scream of escape. Davis Thorne sat in a leather seat, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked out the window at the grey Chicago skyline. Goodbye, you miserable city, he muttered. He had won. It was messy, yes. He had lost the Vespertech deal, and he would have to lay low in Switzerland for a few years while his lawyers cleaned up the embezzlement mess. But he was free. And that waitress? She would rot in federal prison. Sir, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. We have a slight delay. What delay? Davis snapped. I pay for priority clearance. Tower is ordering us to hold position. There are vehicles on the runway. Davis looked out the window. His heart stopped. Blocking the path of the jet were 3 black SUVs. Blue and red lights flashed against the darkening sky. Figures in windbreakers were swarming the tarmac. The cabin door opened. Davis stood up, furious. This is harassment. I will sue the FAA. I will buy the airport and shut it down. Mr. Thorne, a voice shouted from the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't a police officer. It was Special Agent Miller, and standing next to him, hair blowing in the wind, looking like the goddess of vengeance herself, was Alice Vance. Davis froze. He looked at her. She wasn't in cuffs. She was standing tall. She looked him in the eye, and even from the distance, he could feel the weight of her stare. Davis Thorne, Miller shouted, come down with your hands up. You are under arrest for securities fraud, identity theft, and filing a false federal statement. Davis slumped back into his seat. The Scotch glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The sound was tiny, insignificant, against the roar of the engines powering down. It was over. The waitress hadn't just spilled a drink on him. She had drowned him 6 months later. The Grand Elysium was under new management. The Thorne name had been chiseled off the building after the scandal that rocked Wall Street. Davis Thorne was currently awaiting trial without bail, his assets frozen, his empire dissolved and sold off for parts. But tonight, the ballroom was full again. It was a charity gala. But the crowd was different, less stiff, more laughter. At the center table sat Toby Vance. He was in a wheelchair, but tonight he wasn't sitting in it because he had to. He pushed himself up, his legs shaking but holding his weight, and grabbed a glass of sparkling cider. "To my sister," Toby announced, his voice cracking with emotion. The table raised their glasses. Damon Cross was there, smiling more than he had in 20 years. Mrs. Higgins from the hospital billing department was there, wearing a sequined dress Alice had bought her. And Alice stood at the head of the table. She wasn't serving the drinks, she was hosting the dinner. The whistleblower reward from the SEC had been substantial, 10% of the recovered assets. It was millions, enough to pay for Toby's surgery, buy a house, and finish her law degree. Alice looked around the room. She saw the waiters moving through the crowd. She saw a young girl, looking tired, balancing a heavy tray of hors d'oeuvres near the kitchen door. Alice excused herself and walked over. "Heavy night?" Alice asked gently. The girl jumped, looking terrified. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to stand still." "It's okay." Alice smiled. She reached into a clutch. She didn't pull out a check to test the girl. She pulled out a business card. Alice Vance, attorney at law. "When your shift is done," Alice said, "call this number. I'm looking for a paralegal. Someone who knows how to work hard and isn't afraid of bullies." The girl looked at the card, then at Alice, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Alice walked back to her table, back to her brother, back to her life. Davis Thorne had been right about one thing: everyone has a price. But he was wrong about what that price was. For Alice, the price wasn't money, it was justice, and she had been paid in full. And that is the story of how one arrogant billionaire underestimated the wrong nobody. Davis Thorne thought that money gave him the power to treat people like furniture, but he forgot the most important rule of power. It is borrowed, not owned. Alice didn't just win because she was smart. She won because she knew her own worth when the world tried to tell her she was worthless. It's a reminder that no matter who you are or what job you do, your dignity is not for sale. What would you have done in Alice's shoes? Would you have taken the $50,000 to humiliate yourself? Or would you have fought back like she did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a lot more drama coming your way. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.